the format, the way I want to kind of have this process unfold is more closer to a conversation than a seminar or a lecture. And there's a reason for that. One is wherever I go now or around the world and visit programs, and therapeutic community programs exist everywhere in the world now, every continent. And whenever I go, even there are cultural differences, language differences. In some places I need a translator, I don't need that here. But what I'm always looking for when I go to programs is, are these programs really kind of functioning as real communities? And the reason I am really continuing to look for that and search for that really begins with, something I reported to you a couple of days back, which is when we actually have done the research on therapeutic communities and asked the question, do they work? Do people really change? And follow them up for 1, 2, 5, and 12 years after they leave treatment. The early research was so promising, showing that people do really change dramatically. People who have come into these programs looking one way, and then leaving the programs looking another way, and then when you follow them out 1, 2, and 5 years later, see them living different lives with different identities. I'm no longer an addict, I'm no longer what I was, I'm somebody else. That's powerful, and it was based on that early research, which documented the fact that people really do change. And as you heard me say maybe in my earlier comments several days ago, the number of people who changed was really directly related to how long they were in the program. The longer they stayed, the better they did. And those who actually finished the programs, in those days, incidentally, the programs were like 2 years. But those who finished, they did best, but even those who didn't finish, if they were there some period of time, you saw considerable amount of success and improvement even in those people. So why I'm reviewing that scientific conclusion from you is the next question that came out of that was, well, if people are really changing in the therapeutic community, we need to know what actually is the elements or the ingredients of the program that's essentially actually helping them change. So in my world travels, coming back to my first point, I began focusing much more on the question of what are those ingredients as more of like a scientific question. Now, I wasn't writing a novel or any fiction. What actually was going on in the therapeutic community, places like Amity, what's going on in there that actually result in individuals beginning to change? Now, so this is a kind of an introduction. This is the extent of my whole seminar at the moment, just to review this introduction with you. Why I want to have a conversation with you now. And here's what I've done around the world, and I want to do it here. I want you to help clarify that question, these questions. It has to do with the whole issue of people changing and then in effect, why are they changing? I mean, are they changing? And if they are changing, why are they changing? So our conversation is essentially centered in those questions. So it begins this way. And it's a conversation now. I ask this very simple question. What are you learning? The word is learning. Now, I'm going to, before you, and I want to hear from you, and I'm glad your hand is going. But I want you to be thoughtful. I don't want you to give me advertisements for Amity. What I want you to do is I want you to be thoughtful about this. Truthful and thoughtful. Because some of you may feel, I'm not learning anything. And that's okay. This is not really an attempt to assess you in this. It's a mutual conversation to see if we can clarify what we know about the elements of a community approach that I've called in my writings community as method. What do we know about that contributes to change? So when you give me your response, I want you to be honest about it and thoughtful about it. And brief, because we're going to try and get a lot of people to contribute to that first question. What are you learning?
So the first thing that really came to mind was how to feel. You know, there's something that even being here just these 3 months that I noticed that a lot of us have difficulty with. Have a lot of difficulty even accepting the fact that we have feelings sometimes. And how to learn how to develop them, how to develop associations with people, how not to be so inside, how to get outside. Because I know that a lot of our problems really stem from the fact that we disassociate ourselves from society, from other people. You know, and it just grows, the problem usually just grows worse and worse as we just numb ourselves with whatever we do, whether it's drugs, alcohol, or anything else. And in time, we think it's just us. We can't trust, we can't feel, we can't trust ourselves. And it gets to the point that we're so broken down and so different from everybody that it doesn't matter anymore.
I appreciate those comments. I want to kind of summarize it. And I want to encourage that you, when you are responding to some of these questions, to get as close to keeping it on the eye than in terms of a social commentary. But I think it's a smart point that you're making about. And my assumption is you're talking about yourself. That's good. Please.
I learned to actually authentically care about another human being. Before I came here, my care was more political. It was like my family and my friends, mine. Now I realize by being able to practice the forms of like helping in the community and acting as if I care, I do now understand what it means to like just humanly care about another living person, and to how to go about showing my care and concern in a non-political way, basically, so I can help people and not expect something in return.
Terrific. Your statement is, I've learned to care. Both of them are quite rich statements because you're also saying things that lead to my next question, but I'm not going yet to my next question, but we'll come back to it. But thank you for that. In the back.
What I learned here with Amity I started the Amity in Prison Project in 08. And I've been with him since. Is trust. Trust. My message is I still don't trust people. You know, it's about your word. Your demonstration got to line up with your word. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm not going to just listen to somebody that can spout some stuff, some profound stuff, and sound good. Mm-hmm. You got to show me how to live. You got to show me how to be vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And push through that. Because I learned at 4 and 5 years old, I don't trust too many people. I learned how to discern a smile at 5 years old, and I remember that clearly.
Right.
And I carry that through my life.
So you learn to trust.
Yeah.
That's an honest statement, right? Great. So in a way, if we were working with a board and writing things down, and I'm hoping the film will capture this, you are listing out what, in your experience, you think you have learned here. And we've got some important words: to feel, to care for somebody, that I affect other people and other people affect me, trust. I got that. Thank you. Please.
Growing up, it was the same thing. Trust issues, abandonment issues, the whole 9 yards, right?
Right.
So it was really having to come to that point of learning how to love myself before I was able to learn how to love others.
Terrific.
And for me, that was huge.
Yeah, no.
It's still one of those things that at 21 months I'm still dealing with.
Okay.
Right? It still brings up that emotion in me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
Yeah. That's terrific. Thank you for that. That's terrific. Some other responses to the question, please.
What I've been learning here is that that I'm actually believing in myself that I can change.
Believing that I can change.
Believing that I can change, because for so many years in my life, I felt that I was only this, and that I can only be this, and I cannot move any further along in my process in anything. Kind of like Mike was saying, that I was going to continue to be an addict the rest of my life. Well,
Okay.
I don't have to be that no more. Not only this place, but the people that surround me have given me the belief that I can change.
The people that surround me, you mean people outside of
No.
Amity? Or
Some of the demonstrators here,
Oh, okay.
some of my probation officers that are around me, the judge, are just, they believed in me, and it's something that a friend of mine here told me, is that you have to open up to allow somebody else to believe in you first, so that you can start believing in yourself.
So to take your response, see if I really understand it, that I could change, belief that I could change. And then you said some important things, because you think about how I've learned, which is, I'm going to come to that in a moment. You've cited some probation officers and other people. But as part of the next question, what I want you to think about, and then we'll come back to it, because you've already answered the first question, I've learned to believe that I can change. That's very critical. And then I want you to think about the next one, which is when I come back to this, about what it is about the program. And but I'm going to state that in a minute. Thank you for that contribution. I believe I can change. Yes.
What I've learned here is not to put my problems and addiction on a pedestal, because in that way I give them power. So I try to, what I've learned is to be able to humble myself and not give my addiction, my shortcomings, all of that the power by putting them on a pedestal. That was so much a part of my life
Right.
throughout many, many years. So I kind of, even though it was such a part of my life, I kind of glorified how much and what I was doing in my addiction.
That's right. Glorification. That's not from a glorified position. Okay, I appreciate that. Just wanted to make sure I understood. Some other response, please, sir.
I knew that I could recognize some of my feelings that I was going through, but I just knew that were feelings, and I couldn't put a definition to them or a word to name them. And one of the clinical not supervisor, but anyway, a counselor was here, and I was talking to her, and I was going through my own personal, issues, and she was like, "Well, how do you feel?" But then I started naming out my feelings, and I was feeling really low and disappointed and sad and down, and just like I'm doing right now, just laying them out like that, and then she was all happy for me. She said, "Yay!" So what's I'm feeling this way, and you're cheering me on. I couldn't understand that. You have emotional literacy, and I'm like, okay, how does that help me?
That's a good question. That's a good question, actually.
That was confusing to me.
Yeah.
But then, as I went further, it made me understand that knowing what you're going through allows you to go through it again without so much like pressure, or it's a lot easier to go through it. Recognize.
That's good. You learn to recognize and name your feelings.
Yeah.
If I heard you right.
Yes.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you. Any other responses to this question, like what have you learned? Got a hand up somewhere? Where? Yes?
What I learned here is I learned how to communicate with others, and to listen. While I was in my addiction, I was running from problems, not solving it, making conversation with anybody or anything, but I was walking away from it, and I was hiding from my troubles.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned here that you can stand up to it.
Communicate and listen. Terrific. Healing. Honest. Learning how to be a woman. Participating, attending. I'm aware that my brain is clearer. Well, I'm again, if there's, I'm willing to take some more responses to that question. If not, let me then go to a second question. We have a kind of list of responses. You all heard them. If you now had to ask the question, well, here is one thing I've learned and you've answered it, I'd like you to really think about, well, how did I learn that? Or more specifically, what is it about this program that helped me learn that? So we're on the second question. You've already stated something that you've learned, and even some people who may not have responded to the first question, you can respond to this one if it takes you back to the first question. Did I learn anything? And if I did, what was it? And how did that happen? What is it about the program that helped me learn, whether it's self-respect, whether it's trust, whether it's feeling my feelings, whether it's caring for other people, whether it's recognizing that my behavior and attitudes affect other people and they affect me? I'm just reviewing some of the list now. So what is it about the program? This is like kind of the heart of the matter now. I came here, and what is it about this place that helped me somehow learn that? Yeah.
And it was unconditional love. Yeah. That's what it was for me.
So, well, no, wait a minute. That's important. If you're saying this, help us understand that. It's you're really talking about from everybody in the program, students and faculty.
From the first day I came here with absolutely nothing, right? I came with the SD jail shirt and 3 pairs of socks, 2 pairs of underwear, and a pair of gym shorts that I would wash at night, and then I would hang it up to dry on the air conditioner in the room.
Sounds luxurious. Yeah. Okay.
So they made accommodations. They took care of me, right? And for me, this was huge, right? Because you're talking to a guy that had hand-me-downs his whole life, right? And until I reached a certain age to where I learned to pedal dope, right?
Yeah.
And then I bought me a first pair of shoes,
Right.
Which were Pumas because I couldn't afford the Jordans,
Right.
So those were some of the things, right? And when I came here, it was unmerited favor. It was the push-up, right? It was the pull-up, right? Because it wasn't the pull-up that they're putting you down.
Right.
They're pulling you up to bring you up to their level.
That's right.
And that's where it was for me. It was huge because I didn't ask for any of it. I didn't ask for anything.
Right.
I didn't. But there was people there that was willing to help me out, and people that were there to pull me along.
Terrific.
They were here,
Yeah.
and they're still here, right? And even those that have transitioned out into the larger community, they still give me a call and say, "Hey, man, we're so proud of you. We're glad that you're doing great." Right? Demonstrators, the students, right? And that's my small portion of giving back too.
It's terrific. You included some specifics like even being pulled up, unconditional love, which is a broader statement. And I just want us to remember what we're saying. Again, we don't want free advertisements. It's got to be that we're seeking the truth now. And this is one example of, personally, did I learn anything and how did I learn it? And if you come to a statement like that, it's a powerful statement. Just we want to make sure everything we're saying is as real as possible. So what is it about the program? We're on that question, right? That essentially helped me learn what I'm learning. Go ahead.
My first 6, 7 months, all I did was follow demonstrators around trying to catch them slipping.
Yeah.
Trying to catch them slipping so I have a reason to say this stuff don't work.
Right, that's
But
good.
what they did was share their story with me, the most powerful thing that each and every one of us have. They showed me that I'm not the only one that's in pain. And don't anybody can do, if it's woosah, everything is sweet every day.
Right.
Anybody can go through life.
Right.
But I want you to show me how you feel when you're in pain, or you don't have the money to pay a bill. Are you gonna go back to slinging, or you gonna go back to putting that dog food in your arm, or whatever?
Right.
And so it was the demonstrators that shared their story of hope to me, because I didn't believe too much nobody said. I still don't believe what you do.
In older language, like the role models in this, people who would somehow. Great. Yes.
And I remember my first time here and going around in a circle with my group, and they were like, well, you have to participate too. And no, I'm the counselor. And so what I learned was the biggest thing that I still carry with me, and that is to remain in a place, a position of a student. and always be able or have the ability to be open to learn.
Learn to be always open. I'm really a student. That has to do with images and so on. But
Yes.
what was it about the program? Were you confronted on that? What is it about the program that helped you see that?
Outside of Amity and the other dominions of social service, counselors don't have to answer that. Counselors don't have to share their perspective or their life to the students because of the fact that we don't want it thrown back in our face. But once it's there, and if we can accept it, then hey, it's okay. Or if they can learn from it, then it's even better. So it was very difficult, but I have no problem now.
So if I understand, it's a very, very important point in terms of the image breaking of yourself, you know what I mean, in terms of how I think I look and how people should see me, but they somehow open the expectation that you can drop that?
Yes. Yes. I think we established a level of trust.
Trust. Okay, great. Terrific. You got one here.
How I learned about friendship was through people being a friend to me. And people I didn't even know. I mean, it kind of ties in a little bit with what a lot of people are saying, but you too, Donna, in terms of people who I didn't know and Tim. Students, faculty, from the newest person to the people who've been around a long time, that in those circles or in those any kind of setting, that people extended kindness and curiosity to want to know me, and what it was that was so important about friendship, that I learned that it was the lifeline, the life raft to staying in balance, to keeping my emotional footing, to believing in something else could be possible for myself.
Good.
And that in fact, friendship is my estate. I am wealthy based on my friends.
People actually befriending you. You learn friendship through other people.
Yeah.
Please.
You know, as I was talking about glorifying my addiction,
Right.
putting it on a pedestal, you know, when I step back and I see other individuals doing the same thing that I did,
Okay.
it enlightened me to how ugly it is.
Terrific.
You know, and so just listening and hearing it and observing it, it just made me understand how I looked when I was in that same mindset.
Terrific. Just seeing it in others helped me see it in myself, and it's terrific. The element of the program is just seeing other people in the change, this is my word, process, seeing other people changing, and that essentially made it, encouraged you that it can really happen, if I understood you right. Please.
One thing that I'm a die-hard proponent of equality, like down to the half-cent equality. And so viewing my demonstrators and the cooks and the director and enrollment, knowing that they were in my shoes at one time.
Okay.
And they know what I've been through. So what they're saying is from experience, and all of the challenges, the criticisms, the feedback comes from people who were me at one point. So, yeah.
Terrific. That's terrific.
What Amity gives me in one word, PCP. Now, before you guys freak out, that is an acronym, which stands for pain, clarity, and people. This community makes it okay to not be okay. To be amongst other people who are in the same situation, who are feeling pain, all different kinds,
Right.
that we can heal from. Clarity. I have not been this clear-headed in a long time, and believe me, if it was my choice, I would not be so.
Yeah.
Where is the nearest bar? But yeah, this place allows us to, it keeps us rooted. You know, as much as I've tried to avoid thinking on things that I know I have to think about, as much as I try to get away and put my head in a book,
Right.
something. Eventually Amity brings me back. And I have to look at it. I have no choice.
Okay.
And then people. All of us. Every experience that we have here that has genuinely helped us in our process is more likely than not been through somebody else. By hearing someone else's thing, their story, their experience, by being with them and learning to take criticism, by learning to look at yourself when you cannot, and seeing it through the eyes of somebody else, and learning to trust, learning to care, learning to do all of those things are from our associations that we make with other people.
That's terrific.
Thank you.
Well,
PCP saved my life.
those are very, very compelling responses. And you have addressed the two main questions. Did I learn anything? What did I learn? And what is it about this particular program that helped me learn that? And again, I won't review it again. And hopefully one of the outcomes would be simply a list of the responses on to each question, just a simple list. Let me pause and just respond to your responding. One is, most of the words that you have expressed, both on what you've learned and in effect why you've learned it or how you've learned it, are responses that I've heard all over the world, in every language, in every culture. The list, you can almost match word for word what residents or people who live in therapeutic communities, if they're good therapeutic communities and they're working, those are the kinds of responses that you hear. Issues of trust, respect, self-love, feeling unconditional love, criticism, role modeling. You need to understand this. I'll tell you why. It certainly tells me as an old-time scientist now on this, and that is, look, if what I'm hearing I hear all over the world, there must be something lawful going on here. Something is going on. It's like plotting the stars and their movements, you know what I mean, of the planets. But even more important, you notice that in all of this list of what you've learned and what it is about the program that seems to be helping you learn it, you don't hear one medical term. You don't hear one mental health term, psychiatric term. What you hear is something else. Language and responses that completely reflect individuals living in community. I and others. So when you ask yourself, as I've asked you, what I've learned, if you think you're learning trust, or you think you're learning self-love, or you think you're learning how to care, or you think you're learning how to deal with criticism, and you now ask the question, how am I learning that? Is that I'm living in a community which essentially allows that to occur. And there's nothing that's typically medical or mental health about that. It's totally social. Now, the reason I get impassioned about that is because we call places like Amity and similar therapeutic communities treatment. And one of the reasons we do that, and part of your education to know this, that in the first 5 years of that, we really didn't talk about it as treatment. Because these programs, like Amity and others, they developed by the participants themselves. They weren't essentially introduced by psychiatry or psychology or anything like that. None of that worked anyway. So the whole approach was developed by the first generation of participants themselves. And you have a good sense of this, living 24/7, living in it all comes out to the word community. And whatever is happening to me that's affecting me, whether I'm feeling better about myself, whether I trust myself more, whether I feel I can love myself more, whether I can feel I can care for someone else, where's that coming from? It's coming from your interaction with other people. not coming from any medications. It's not even coming from formal counseling. It's coming from the interaction of other people. Now, again, you can hear a little bit, I still have some passion around this, is because I saw this in the first days in New York and recognized, as a psychologist, and recognized that here was a powerful approach. People who are changing, if you like, learning some very, very powerful things in their lives, like how to trust, how to feel safer, how to care for other people, how to feel friendship, how to identify feelings. And they're learning this through each other. That's one of the reasons I got deeply invested in, into this whole process 100 years ago. It sometimes feels like 100 years ago. And then, of course, just in terms of my own commentary on this, was to try to reframe that into community as a method. Whatever you've been talking about, I try to reframe all of that so the rest of the world could understand that it was not, even though it was a unique process going on, it was absolutely a process that everybody could, in the end, come to understand. The use of community to help individuals change themselves. So you need to hear that it's universal. And I've been doing this survey, so to speak, for 20 years, 25 years. We've been going around the program. So, and I know it's across generations. There's another important point about your response, and I want you to understand this. When you tie it back to the research, that is, do they change? And is the change an enduring change? Does their life change? And the research, as I mentioned when I opened this up, the research showed, of course, that people who've stayed in the process, you see long-term success, 5, 10, and 20 years later. Even people who maybe not have completed a long-term program, if they stayed some kind of sufficient amount of time, it essentially assisted them in their continuing their lives years later. Of course, the best outcomes are those who complete. Now watch. Knowing that's a scientific fact, that time in the process is the best predictor of whether the process is going to be stable years later. You then come back to this question, well, what is happening in that time? Which is the way I opened up this seminar. What is it about the elements of community that ultimately help people go on to live a different life? You've been spelling out some of those elements. We didn't get to all of them, but you've been spelling out some of those elements just from your own experience. If I learn trust, if I learn to love myself, if I learn to care, if I can accept pull-ups, if I can give pull-ups, if I see other people changing, these are some of the elements. So here's the issue. You now know something, which is the science says if I have to be in it to win it. You got to stay in the process, the change process, and in effect, what that's all about is me learning, changing through my interaction with other people. It comes down to a simple statement. Learning about myself through my interaction with other people. And if I stay with that long enough, and if I stay open enough to that long enough, I will change. Even if I begin it in some exercise way, like acting as if. When we ask people to act as if, it's useful to take a moment on this phrase, it's very powerful. When we tell people to act as if, what we are saying to them, even if you don't understand it, even if you don't accept it, just do it this way. I always like to say, be the person you would want to be rather than the person you have been. Try it, and you will see for yourself. That takes in the issues of repetition. And if I keep doing it a certain way, you come to see for yourself that what is true for you. So what I'm hoping you get out of this part of our discussion is this relationship between staying in the change process, staying in the change process. Not simply having a programmatic view like I'm here and I got to do my 3 months or my 4 months, 6 months, give me my certificate, case closed. Staying in the change process, which usually means continually exposing myself to what I need to know about myself. And I can do that best by essentially doing that interactionally. Yes?
He said it's sometimes difficult to interact with everybody when there's a rule, a 60-day rule when you can't speak to the opposite sex.
Okay. I used to take statements like that and frame that into a third question, which is, well, what can we do to improve the program? I don't want to do that. I'm going to take your question, your comment in a minute. I want to take it in a minute. Because I want to pause on what I'm now saying, which is trying to relate the science of what we know about outcomes and people being in the process and what that process consists of in terms of increasingly allowing themselves to change through interacting in the entire community as a member of the community. But now comes questions like this, and I want to use that as a segue to the last phase of our conversation, which is comments and questions, particularly questions and criticisms. So in some ways you spoke about some of the nice things, but let's hear about if there's anything that's problematic or you need clarification on, or what troubled you, or maybe what troubled you even about the program, or troubled you about a particular activity like a 60-day, some kind of a speaking ban or whatever. I'd like you to raise those questions in the remaining time that we have together, and in the spirit of that, the way I want you to view this period is how to use me in terms of these questions. While I'm here, how can you use me? And of course, for me, what my benefit is, how can I be useful? So that's one question. So I'd like you, if you're willing, to reframe that question.
Community as a whole, and then suddenly it's contradictory to that statement when I'm being told 60 days. Sorry, you can't interact with that person. I do understand at a point where it can be a distraction and opposite.
Detrimental.
Sorry?
Detrimental.
Detrimental.
Yeah, but I find it detrimental. I find that everybody has something interesting to say, and when I do get the chance to talk to a male, they have. I learn a lot from them, whether it be politics, music, art.
Have you been on speaking ban, is that it?
It's a general rule around the community that the first 60 days you can't speak, well, you can say hello, but you can't have a conversation with the opposite sex.
Oh, okay. And the reason why that's an important clarification, because there are now differences across programs. Some programs don't do that necessarily. Some programs do. So I always need to clarify, you know what I mean? That's why I called it a speaking ban. In other programs, it was actually a speaking ban, and it was essentially a strategy to address some behavioral or attitudinal issue in an individual, or even in the community. You can put the whole community on a speaking ban, you know. But that's a related but tangential issue. Your question then is, if we have this 60-day rule, which the extent of gender interaction, I think you're talking about that, the gender interaction is limited to something, right? It's limited. Do I understand that right?
Yes.
Okay. What do you think the rationale for that is? Why do we do that?
Because maybe in the past there have been incidents to sort of distract the individual from why they're here.
That's great. No, okay. First of all, as a contribution, your question is a contribution. And what we're on, folks, is this is the phase of our conversation. I'm just reminding you, the phase of our conversation is now, I want to hear some real questions about things like that. You know, what is positive or negative or troubling or confusing or frustrating about being here and in this kind of a program. So this is one. The approach to the question is what I want you to pay attention to. That is my response. I then said to you, what do you think the rationale for that is? What is the reason for doing that? And you find it difficult. I can't really see a reason for that. Does anyone have a rationale for the gender limitation? Can you explain why we do that?
The first 30, 60, 90 days is a diversion. Because people are coming in either still detoxing or really not even sure what's going on with themselves, being in a new place, in a new environment. So then somebody says, and they could very well be really honest and truly good friends, but that takes away from my treatment program. At that moment, we become friends. I got to spend more time with my friend, talking to my friend about the things I do and don't like in the process, whether it's mine or theirs. So 60 days, if you're going to be here a minute, it's nothing. It's like a speck.
No, it's a terrific statement, and there's a theme in all of these responses. I hope you're hearing some of this, the theme that it's, and it's very, very powerful and very sophisticated from a kind of social psychological point of view. And the idea is we want to discourage typical social sexual relationships for the purposes of getting the individual on another path in life. You know, that's what underlies that. You know, go ahead.
I mean, I think it's, I understand it, sort of, but maybe it's, a lot of people like, have come from backgrounds that they have maybe been abused by the opposite sex.
Abuse, backgrounds, yeah.
Verbally and such. And I guess it's just something I have to.
No, that's okay. To struggle with it out loud is okay. I don't think it's obvious. I think it's a worthy question to ask. You know, why do we have kind of a kind of gender segregation, a kind of that, limited gender interaction, and what's the rationale? When I use rationale, it's always this: why we do what we do. So, in the end, the way that question has to get answered is, what is it that we know about our people who come to programs like this in terms of typically what their problem history has been? That's the first thing. What do we know about them? And then secondly, what do we know about getting them fully engaged in a process of self-change where they are become increasingly open to changing themselves, paying attention to themselves about what they have to change? What do we know about that? Because if an individual is not really essentially invested in self-change, focusing on themselves, they're less likely to change in that sense. You could even last in a social situation for a year. People last in prison and don't change at all, you understand? So we know that. You can sit in other communities and don't change at all. Living social lives, talking, interacting, and so on, and not change. So the issue is, what do we know about the person, their history, and and particularly now, particularizing it, what do we know about the gender issues and the issues of some of the sexual related issues and the attitudes and the treatment and mistreatment? What do we know about that? And we say, well, we know a lot about that. And then you finally say, what would be a useful intervention, a useful strategy, given what we think we know about most people who come into programs like this? What would be a useful strategy? So, well, maybe what we ought to do is basically set up a kind of, you called it a rule where you minimize the interaction for a while, with the objective being, and this is, you have a right to raise this question, are we successful with that rule? Does it really work? The objective is, I want to get the individuals off the social interaction, the gender-related issues that might be either overt, open, or closed. I want them focusing on themselves. And you can ask the question, did it work? Which is always what I try to teach every community. You don't simply hold on to an activity because that's the way we always did it. You come back to and ask the question, if we've got something, a rule in place like that, you always have to ask the question, is it working? Do we know why we do that, and is it working? So one issue, I don't know whether it's working here. I didn't make a judgment about that.
It's been implemented.
You what?
I don't know how long the rule's been implemented.
Okay, that's a good question, how long it's been implemented. But at least here's the way, what I want you to get out of my response. I don't know also whether it's working. I know that it exists in many programs, and it's rooted way back in the histories of very troubled histories of gender interactions. And you needed to have separation for safety. Physical safety, social safety, psychological safety, and having individuals feel comfortable enough, you understand, in terms of dealing with themselves. But if they're still coming off the street or coming off to other issues in their lives, they can immediately start having all kinds of feelings if they're in a kind of a totally wide open social interactional situation. So we had a long history of understanding what that was about. But it doesn't negate the question, which is, you should understand why that rule is there. And it should be clear about, I'm trying to make it clear for you for the moment, but you should understand it, and it should be a question that's raised. You don't have to defy it. You don't have to go nuts around it, you understand, but you can ask why we do what we do. And it always should come back to, does this help individuals ultimately engage in treatment and change? Do they engage in this community and change? That's always the criterion for me. Does that help ultimately? You may not like it for 30 days or 40 days, but you may find that 60 days something good happened from that. And so you always have to evaluate, did it work? So I appreciate your question, and I haven't settled it in this program, but that's the way to look at it. Yes?
I came here and I wholeheartedly bought everything Amity told me to do because I wanted to change. I had destroyed my life enough, I was done. Did the ban wholeheartedly. Well, after realizing that I was getting like junk food and cigarettes and gum from the men, you know, I realized that I do manipulate. I'm getting stuff from these guys. So I stopped. No more interaction. What it did was it uncovered the issue that I have with believing, like without the validation from men, I felt undesirable. I felt like I was ugly and useless and nobody would ever love me. And that was a core issue that it needed to happen for me to be able to talk to other women and say, look, this is something I carry. And I don't, removing men from the picture allowed that to uncover.
Terrific.
In my process.
Terrific.
The other thing, another issue I had was, why do I have to do all these roles when I'm here to get treatment? You know what I mean? I wanted people to help me. I don't want to help other people.
Right.
That was one of my problems.
The recommendation is that for some period of time, usually around a year, the focus should be only on you and not on relationships, because the downside is much greater than the upside of that, and that is you'll be distracted. All kinds of things can happen from his statement about the romance is my program, you know what I mean, and instead of essentially focusing on yourself. So that's true. And in the early days, that was the kind of governing principle even around no sex, you understand, and so on. And not only because of the social issues there, but we wanted people to learn how to live first with themselves and for themselves, and not be distracted by their impulses and not be distracted by their desires and their cravings. It's a powerful, truth, although very difficult to learn. But so your question brings up large issues about how people change, why they may have to be essentially uncomfortable by, let's say, being frustrated with 60 days or 90 days of whatever. And the real way to go through that is always ask the question why we do it, but actually do it. If you do it, you're most likely to come to the answer for yourself by why we do it. So the great worry we have, and your question raises, it had to do with early dropout. Remember, dropout, staying in treatment is the best predictor of changing your life. If you run out of treatment too early, you abort that. One of the issues people would run out of too early is that they feel there are rules or they can't do something or they're blocked, so they run. And so why your question is so important is that if you get through 60, 90 days of whatever the rules are, and I didn't tell you to simply submit, but you can have a guideline for yourself, which is, I want to know why we do what we do, and I think you should raise that question. But the first requirement is, I will do it. You know what I mean? So that I won't defy it by not doing it, I will do it. And find out for myself, you know what I mean, what's there. This is my encouragement for everybody. You do it, and you see what you get from that, what you learn from that. What we don't want you to do is run away from everything that's difficult right from the first day. Because we know that will give you nothing if you run away from that. Yes?
My dilemma at times is, the holding somebody accountable, the positive pull-up.
Right.
a lot of times I see it done in a negative manner, which in turn produces resentment, animosity, anger, which is not therapeutic in a community like this. You know, I mean, I know I can speak for myself.
Right.
Like, if I have an issue, a personal issue, and then whatever it is, and somebody else, oh, he looks like he's having a bad day. Well, let's group them, and then, you know, then it becomes a bigger issue. And I feel, in my heart, I feel some type of way towards that person, being that, you know, they took it upon themselves to make my problems their issue. See what I'm saying?
Well, I hear it, and it's somewhere in here is a very, very important question. It started out with as simple as how we may be delivering pull-ups. You know, could that somehow be done? Are we doing that in some disrespectful, provocative way? Is there a better way to do that? That's one kind of question, and we can deal with. But then you gave me a different illustration.
Well, yeah.
You know, and it's important because that may be a personal one for you. You know, the way someone, let's group. You know, because you don't somehow. The people responding to you, let's have a group and see what that's all about with you. Those are related but different examples. And on the issue of the first one, on let's say the pull-ups, that's a training issue. In other words, certainly what we want every single student/resident to learn is how basically to speak to each other in respectful ways and say honest things in respectful ways, and you receive it in a respectful way. If that does not happen, and it may not happen, people have attitudes, we also know that there's an even larger lesson. Watch this. This person really spoke disrespectfully to me. How do I deal with that? Well, ordinarily, I could if I was out in my other life, I might have been dealing with it from anything from either punching somebody in the mouth or walking away or carrying a grudge, all negative. If I deal with it and say, this person spoke to me respectfully, but I will just hear it and only hear what's useful for me to hear in this. And not only that, as you know, we teach people to say thank you. Even if it is discourteous, disrespectful, even if you're mistrusted, you don't think it's for your good. The larger benefit for you is how do I handle myself in that? So when I get that kind of a negative stimulation in my life, how do I deal with it? And when you look at that, you can then say, the way I have dealt with that, has that really worked in my life? Has that been any good? Most often, when you finally review it, you find out not that you were wrong that someone was disrespectful or someone had bad attitudes or the world is unfair in the biggest sense, but how did I actually deal with that? So that I self-victimized. The world didn't victimize me, I self-victimized. And the way you self-victimize is but I get an attitude also, and suddenly we're all in trouble. Instead of, I got it, I didn't like it, I heard what he or she said to me, I'll say thank you and go on my way. That's the worst case. Some case, it may be they didn't really speak to you that way, you know what I mean, and you immediately feel any sense of criticism when someone speaks to you, and that's another reason to stay quiet and say thank you, you understand? And learn how to absorb criticism, which is several people have talked about. So it's a great issue. How I deal with this rather than sit in quiet resentment about what I didn't like about what I just heard. Any other, what we're working on in this last part of our conversation is activities, elements, principles, concepts that you experience here that you may have some questions about or some, as some of you have been illustrating. Please, we'll take one or two more. We got a newcomer, right? 2 or 3 days, and so, yeah, okay.
I'm actually seeing that, there's a lot of 30 days and 90 days and 6 months and all that. That's what I'm supposed to be here for, is for 6 months.
6 months.
But I'm kind of hearing that that's not enough time.
Right.
And I understand, but at the same time, my question is, how much time is enough time? Because if 6 months isn't long enough, to me 6 months is a long time.
Right.
To me 30 days is a long time.
That's right.
It can happen between now and tomorrow.
Yeah.
know, that's my question, is that how is that, how would I know when enough time is enough time?
The question is a fair question. It's a difficult one, but it's a fair question. And I'll try to give you the best that I've understood over the years from this, both from clinical and science experience. When I ask the question about people changing through treatment, one of the key criteria that I look for to see whether someone has changed has to do with two words. It has to do with motivation and readiness. Leave out the 6 months for the moment. Just if we talk about change, what I'm interested in you, if I come to look and say, how is she doing? How is he doing? What I'm always looking at, how are they changing? And one of the main dimensions of change is they're increasingly showing more and more motivation. I'll define that for you in a moment. They're increasingly showing more and more readiness. What's motivation? Motivation, increasingly they are recognizing, disclosing problems that they have. Not only life problems, got involved with the police, lost my kids, lost my jobs, you know about that. Those are consequences of their problems. The real problems is that they're disclosing what I'm beginning to see about myself that is a problem. That's the first measure. When I'm watching someone go through treatment, I'm listening for them. Are they now, with all honesty, beginning to disclose real problems? And that is what I see about myself has been a problem. That's one. Then finally, the second one is a person changing. Are they ready to change? You can actually see a problem and agree that it's a problem. And you can even want to change once I see that problem, but you still may not be ready. So and that came out, that's a whole other science lecture. Sorry, we won't do it now, but just to give you the headline on that. So the readiness is another real measure of whether this individual is changing. Readiness means not only motivation, I see problems, I want to change them, and watch this, I will do whatever it takes to change. When I start to hear people begin talking that way to themselves and then others, I'll do what I have to do. I used to do this test at admissions at the door in New York to find out whether individuals were ready, whatever it takes. I used to tell them, you're going to come into this program. It's not, you live in a paradise here. The New York programs, you're coming in, you got plaster falling off the walls, you got 6 people living in the dorm, the food stinks, you understand that? And people are yelling at you all the time. I used to give them the darkest picture of the program. And next thing out of their mouths was, I'll do whatever it takes. That's the readiness. And now comes your 6-month question. What you need to pay attention to is, A, am I changing? Forget about 6 months. Am I changing? And one way you can look at whether you're changing is, am I motivated? Do I recognize problems? Is there anything about myself I know is not good that I need to change about myself? And then finally, this next stage, which is readiness. Am I going to do what I need to do to make that change? You got that so far? So 6 months doesn't matter. What matters is, did he get to that point? If he gets to that point, then we have some assurance that even if he's got to leave here at 6, even if you have to leave at 6, I don't know that you have to, but if you had to leave at 6, you're still going to continue in the process. Are you with me? If you look at it simply as a 6-month do the time and not use the time, you're right, nothing's going to happen. So the issue is what I just described. You make a decision at 6 months, you may have the option to stay. My hope for you is if you have that option, you've gotten far enough to say, look, I see enough about myself, I see what's happened to me, I've got to be here. And if I can't be here, because some programs are really short-term programs, they get thrown out after 6 months, you'll go somewhere, you'll get in somewhere else. You got to stay in the process of change. Are you with me? Does that make sense to you? Great. I appreciate the question, though. It's a good one. Or comment.
Problem relapsing.
Yes.
My stinky thinking and
Right.
my king baby pops up sometimes.
Right.
You know, and I have to deal with it. If I want to take that drink, it's up to me to take that drink or not. It's up to me to change myself. Because what I heard from one demonstrator that he left from here is, for you is
you do you right now. Don't forget about other people's problems. Do you is my process, what I'm gonna do with my life. If I wanna take that drink, it's up to me. If I can take that can, or that dope, or that meth, wherever I came in from. Because I don't want to fall into that same gap of hole that I came out of. Nobody didn't help me to get out of that hole. Nobody didn't told me or set me up saying that you're doing this wrong, but nobody even told me that. I had to pull it up. I learned that for myself, that I need to change myself.
Right.
That's how I see it.
So it leads to some of my first questions. You're living here now. If I'm living here, you have to ask the question, is there anything about my living here that's helping me change myself? You can answer that. Maybe nothing. You may be living here, and there may be nothing that you're actually experiencing that's helping you change yourself, and you're only left with one issue, which is, it's up to me not to take the next drink. Yeah. And I understand that. It's right for you to ask the question, is there anything about living in this community that's essentially, that I feel is helping me to change myself? Your specific issue about taking the next drink, I want to tell you something about that. This is very formal what I'll say now. For some numbers of people where alcohol has been the main problem, other drugs, we no longer can now ignore 50 years of other research, which is brain research. And we now know, and I can't run away from the brain aspects of this, even though I talked sociology and community and social psychology. The brain, if you've had long involvement with drugs, particularly alcohol, there are brain changes. And you have to acknowledge that they are reversible. You can change the brain. We know that too. And that's time related. You need a long time for the brain to begin to get back again, so that the whole issues of taking that first drink, which is a kind of craving issue, if that whole issue of taking that first drink is a little less disturbing when the brain is in better shape. And that takes a long while. And then here's another part. And this is the part I want you to understand. If I'm actually learning to live differently for a year, how to get up in the morning, how to work, how to get involved with recreation, how to deal and walk and talk with other people, how to raise my children, how to stay on a job. If I'm really learning to do those things, you have now a strong competition to any kind of craving. We know that. That's the second part. So if you learn to live differently, it prepares you much better to deal with, in quotes, any trigger in your life that you want to pick something up. Because I have another life now, and I'm invested in that life. Good therapeutic communities are designed to help you begin that life change and to create that life change and give you that opportunity to see yourself living differently, so that you can then deal with when an old kind of trigger or an old image that may come back. So I appreciate what you're saying, and what I hope is that you'll pay attention to what's going on here and see if there's anything you can really learn for yourself. Does that help? Thank you. Was that off camera, Days? Is that, no? Okay. That's show business now. I got that part. Yeah. Okay. So, yes, we'll take one or two more.
Is it only natural to have a little fear to anything, like anything you do, like even with a fighter or something like that, before a big fight, he is totally ready for that fight, because his trainer told him to. And he knows his body's ready to, but there's always that little fear going into that ring, but once he's in that ring, he has the ability to go on with the fight.
It's a great analogy, and I really, I would not only say is it natural to have the fear, it's desirable to have the fear. We learned this, I learned this in dealing with our residents when they were coming to re-entry, been around 9 to 12 months in the program, now going to move out into the world. And if those individuals were not experiencing anxiety or some fears about moving out, I was worried about them. And that's an old-time mechanism to suppress a feeling, which is dangerous. The issue is, if you have anxiety, if you have fear, it's expected, you should be. Why? Because you've been in a program, whether it's 9 months or 12 months, this is one world. Then there's the world out there, and everything I've learned here sounds good, but I don't know how that's going to test in the real world out there. That's all new, and that's right. You have every right to raise questions about, did I learn anything? Will I be all right? Can I really handle myself when I now get out into the real world? That's why I began to rewrite about the whole issues of reentry being, how do we keep people in the reentry phase of the program learning how to use the world outside to change themselves, because for a year we've been teaching them how to use the world inside to change themselves. How do we now teach them to use the world outside to change themselves? And we need that anxiety and that fear. And when we didn't see it, I was always worried about that there was a risk factor here. Somebody was walking, I'm okay, it's like case gold, I'm cured, give me my certificate, I'm walking, and I'm all straight. You know what I mean? We knew that there was a lot that was probably being suppressed in that. So you're on the right track when you think about that.
The question I have is, in your professional opinion, do you feel it's like kind of mandatory for an individual to hit rock bottom before they can effectively change themselves for the rest of their life? You know how the saying goes, you haven't got it out of your system yet, or it's still a little bit in there. So, you know, if you haven't completely got it out of your system,
right,
hit rock bottom, do you think that's the only way that you can effectively make a change for
the whole rock bottom hypothesis, that you had to go, I don't know what the actual bottom was, but whatever that was, you know, bottom has trap doors. What you're getting at is, I no longer think about rock bottom as a real place, but I do recognize that every individual basically may essentially be at a certain place in their maturation, how mature they are, in their history of their lives, where they've been acting out as criminal lifestyles or addictions. What experiences are still very, very seductive for them, attractive to them? What it is that they are still preoccupied with that they would like to actually have happen to themselves? What images that they think they still want to have? That's a good, you can confront, I would say, as long as people have, that's very active in people's lives. I want to get back to the lifestyle outside, because I'm even addicted to the lifestyle. You hear that even in a number of dealers, you understand, where their problem was not necessarily active drug use, but just simply selling, but they were addicted to the lifestyle. The issue you're raising is, if you were in, and I'll talk to you right here now that you're in the program, I want to know about that. I don't care whether you're at the rock bottom. I would want to know, do you still have real feelings and thoughts about a life that may involve addiction, may involve whatever you're doing? Is that still appealing to you? Do you still see value in that? I would hope that you would stay around long enough to have those thoughts, or maybe even those fantasies, challenged, you know what I mean, in that way. So you give yourself the opportunity to rethink it. So I accept it, and we tell many people, you know, they have to go on another run to do this and find out for themselves, and they're up. It looks that way. You have people who essentially are still harboring some desires or attractions to do that, and they may be big enough to offset what they're learning in a program, and they may run. We got that. A good program, though, would help the individual get to that very quickly, even in the early months of being in here. What's still attractive about life? What is it about you still want to get out of that addiction, and so on. So the issue is, yes, everybody has their own bottom on this. It's not a universal bottom for everybody, and have their own bottom. Our task, I think, is to try to help them quickly see what that bottom is, and see if we can help them somehow work through that. What's so appealing about that? What I like to say to people on this, you may have that, but I'd like you to go through another experience long enough and real enough, like a year or so, and see what it looks like to you a year from now. If you want that other life, you know what I mean, you'll go to that other life. But first, compare that to an alternative. A lot of our people come in treatment have no option for comparison. They've only lived one way. And the issue is, live another way for a while. And I accept that. You may have cravings, you may still have fantasies about this, and I accept that. All I want them to pay attention to, stay long enough to see for yourself, if you live a different way for some period of time, whether that other life still is as appealing as it once was. Are you with me on this? So I never try to discourage people from what they're thinking in terms of that life. I just want to know that they're thinking it, so it's not a secret bomb going off. But then I come back to this issue. Stay with it, live this way for a while, and then you'll see for yourself what you want to do in a year from now. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does.
Thank you for that question. It's a great issue. Well, I guess I'm a little tired, but what about you? I don't know. So I don't have a kind of a wrap-up, but I have because this has been this is what I wanted to do. So I'm going to stop and do what we always do in TCs before I finally stop, and ask you for some feedback as to this hour that we've been together or so. How did this go for you?
I liked it a lot because you're a very knowledgeable man, and you've got great insight into, you have, I don't know, 50 plus years.
Yeah.
With the science and the psychological aspect of it. So it was unique actually getting your take on a educated level as far as being able to understand actually the meat and potatoes of our issues. So
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Appreciate that. Please.
Just take the time out to marinate on the question, marinate on the answers, and be honest with ourselves.
Okay.
That's what you challenge us to do.
And what you just said about if I stick around long enough to know to live a different lifestyle,
Right.
then more or less what I hear is the great rewards at the end. And what do I see?
I really see how the way that you had used a couple of questions to figure out where we were at, right? And it was almost like you were playing a game of spades you threw off so you would be able to find your partner. And I love the way you did that, the way that we were able to find you and you were able to find us. And it was just magnificent, man. Thank you.
I appreciate that.
You do really good work.
Appreciate that.
That gives you a very articulate in your responses to everyone. I personally got a better understanding, of your answers related to the questions that were thrown at you, and it was very intriguing and very knowledgeable.
All the questions that were asked and the feedback that you gave, the demonstrators here and the faculty, they've demonstrated that to me and trying to let me understand that. And being here this far, I have begun to understand all of that.
Okay.
And I understand that we are in the continuing process, and that I believe I have reached to that point right now because I am living in a whole different, I have changed my ways and I'm going to school now and stuff like that, and that my continuation is going to keep going on. And then this is a one-on-one basis around here in our community, with the demonstrators and myself.
Right.
And then having a founding member like you, having the third party just articulate and give a more deeper understanding about it, I really appreciate it.
Okay.
Because I have a deeper knowledge of it and a deeper understanding, and I want to thank you for that.
Okay.
Thanks for reinforcing me. I am quite a stubborn, free-spirited, spoiled brat, and I need people to reinforce things in quite a diplomatic way, and I appreciate, it's very knowledgeable. And being here, I can't remember the last time I really gave my chance to try and excel at something, and I've got a long way to go, but I feel like this is a great opportunity. I've been resisting so much
Good.
for such a long time.
Good.
Now I'm sort of, I'm seeing little breakthroughs.
It's good. That's terrific what you're saying. I'm encouraged by that. Thank you.
How do you stay humble?
How do I stay humble? That was the question?
How are you considering your experience and basically your clear intelligence refrain from being, what's the word I want to term or phrase, the entire show? Because from what I've seen, you managed to include everybody in this. You managed to not tell people what they should feel, what they should think, or how it should be. And I just thought that was very impressive.
Well, let me just give you a kind of personal response that may take care of all of that. You must appreciate and remember that if I'm here doing this, primarily I'm doing it for myself. This is my life. So I come, talk, you can use words like share, but it's really whatever I'm doing. In the last analysis, when I examine why I do what I do, I have to say, in all full honesty with myself, for what it's worth for you, this is what gratifies me. This is what gives me some sense of meaning in life. And so really, this is for me. It may look like I'm coming here doing something for you, right? And that's the way it's promoted, right? You get somebody coming, and that's the way it's advertised. And it is advertised that way, I understand that. But in terms of your question, which is an absolutely fair question, I wouldn't want you to be confused and have any illusions about who I am and what I do, and your question goes right to that. I'm grateful to come here. I'm grateful to speak. I'm grateful that I can still speak, you understand? And that in fact, somehow it remains clear, understandable. If that all happens, that's a validation of my life. So it's the only, if that translates into humility, or maybe it does, but I want you to understand those words about myself. It's the best I can give you on that. And I hope everybody understands it, because I'll repeat it if you want. And that is, it's for me. That's not the same, I'm not making a coarse statement that I don't care about you, but in the truest sense, I do what I do primarily for what ultimately it gives to me. If that does something for you, that's good. Does that help? Yes. Thank you. We'll see you again on the trail. Thank you.